Hello, and welcome to this Mix It Up tutorial. Today we're going to be covering how to create a death counter in OBS, and we'll be covering multiple levels of complexity here. And how this video will be formatted is the first section of the video. We'll be showing you how to make a very simple death counter that you can update manually using a few chat commands. And then the second section will be how to make that process a little bit more automated so that you can save multiple game death counters and be able to save and load those when you go back to those games. In the third section, we'll be covering how to even further automate that so that when you start a stream, whatever game is tagged, that game's death counter will load and be displayed on screen. And when you end your stream, that game's death counter will be hidden from the screen and will be saved and updated into a saved location that you can load later. And then so every single time you start your stream, if you've tracked deaths in that game before, those deaths should be represented on stream without any manual intervention. So then at the end of this video, you'll have a death counter that can be completely managed with 3 commands and is able to go across many games. All right, so let's get started. First of all, we're going to have to create a death counter, just a very simple and basic death counter. In order to do so, we'll go into the commands section of Mix It Up, more to here. And in this window, we're going to start with a new command. So this command is going to be the command that updates the death counter. So it'll be the command that either your mods or your viewers or whoever is going to have to use in order to increment your death count by 1. So every time you get a death, it'll be something like !death or dead or whatever. And so we just need to give this one a name. So we'll call it a death, I suppose. Very simple. I like to use command groups to help keep things together. So we're going to put this under a new command group called death counter. There we go. And I like to use multiple aliases as well. So in here, we're going to put multiple words here. So we'll do dead. We'll do death. I like to do even sort of meme funny words, so like DED dead. And I mean, you feel free to go wild here. These are all aliases. They just need to be space separated. And so all these commands, so you can do !dead, !death, !DED, and that will all activate this command that we have right here. All right, as far as for the actual meat and potatoes here, we're going to start with a counter action. So go to counter right here, add that in there. And the first thing we want to do is set save to file to be on. So we're going to name this counter, and so we're going to name it, I mean, it seems like obvious, we should name it deaths, right? There we go. And the action we want to do to it is we do want to update it. It defaulted to that. We can also reset it and set it if you wanted to make separate commands, but for this, we need to update it. We want to update it +1. There we go. That's the first step. We can close that now. Next thing we want to do is actually show it in OBS, right? So you can do this with many different streaming softwares that are compatible with Mix It Up. We have XSplit, OBS Studio, Streamlabs OBS. It should work pretty much the same way no matter what one you use. I use OBS Studio, so we're going to stick with OBS Studio for this example. So what we're actually wanting to edit in OBS Studio is a text source, because we're going to try to show that number on the screen. And here we can be as specific as we want. So it all just depends on your text source in OBS. So let me go ahead and open up OBS really quick, and we can make that text source really quick. So here's my basic OBS setup. We're going to go ahead and add a text source. I'll call this death counter. All right, so in the text source, it's important to make sure we're going to read from file, because all this is going to get saved to a file. And then we can browse to our file. Let's see here, I'm going to go ahead and put this in my tutorials folder. Okay, so we have this is our file location, so it can be wherever you want on your computer. This is just the arbitrary place that I'm choosing to put mine. And we're going to go ahead and start a new text file here to make it so that OBS has something to look at. Here it is, and it's going to be called death counter. So we keep all those naming conventions similar so it's nice and clear. So we're going to click on that and open it. So I just made a new text file in that folder. We just named it death counter. It's completely blank. There's nothing in it. And now we've selected that to be where we're reading from in OBS. So whatever gets put into that should display in OBS. So now we have that pretty much set up. You know what? Let me stretch this out to make that easier. Okay, there we go. So yeah, just to review, read from files checked. Got our death counter text checked. Everything else you can set to whatever you like. Set the font, whatever. It's outside of the scope of this tutorial, so I'll let you find that information elsewhere if you need to, but it's all pretty self-explanatory, so go nuts. Make it yours, you know? Okay, so we're done here. We're gonna hit OK. Now we have our death counter source right here, and it's, you know, it doesn't have anything in it, so it's kind of squished, so we can edit that later, the size of it and all that. Let's go ahead and go back into our Mix It Up window here. Now we have a source name, which is going to be death counter, what we named the source right there. Death counter. And if you want to get, you know, real specific, and maybe if you have multiple places where you might have things called death counter, you can actually say that what scene name it's in as well. So for an example, we can do that. We're under screen capture here in my scene section. So we can go ahead and put screen capture just to make sure we're looking at the right one. All right, and now for the text, we are going to make that our death variable. So our death count right here, as you can see when we named that, it says no $sign and stuff right here, because what we're doing here is creating a variable name. So that variable is able to be called pretty much anywhere and Mix It Up. But for our purposes, we want this label to be used elsewhere down here, so we want that label to be right here. So when we actually use the label, not creating it, we put that $sign in there. So that means that whatever the death count is after this operation happens, so we're going to increase it by 1. Say it was at 40, now it's at 41. That is then going to come down here with this next command, and that 41 will be put in the place of the name of that variable. So that should update it. We also want to make sure we click on this visible tab to make sure it keeps it on the screen and doesn't hide it. And then we want to, last but not least, we're going to point to that path, that same path that that death counter is on. So we're going to go to my project files, tutorial, death counter. There we go. Same place we're pointing at with the source in OBS. And yes, replace it's fine. That's not a problem there. Just go ahead and say yes. There we go. Now we have our death counter there, same place that we have our source connected to. And finally, the last thing, and this is something I just like to do. You do not have to do this, but I like to get a little feedback sometimes when I use a command, just to make sure that I was actually heard, you know, just in case there's some wonkiness somewhere. Maybe Mix It Up is acting up and you want to know, like, well, did it even hear it? Well, this is how you know. So I like to put things like, let's see, username, so we know who's the one that it's like talking to the person who was trying to run the command. Updated the death count. And then we can use that variable again that we used up here, the deaths variable, in this message as well. So then we can say like death, oh, spell it right. Deaths, and then we can put the variable again, like that, and that will say then, let's say Dom Dynamite, for example, updated the death count. Deaths is 41, for our example. So there we go. And last but not least, we do have, in case you have this red message as well, it just means you're not, you don't have the connection set up in Mix It Up. So we can address that really fast by going into our main Mix It Up, clicking on our hamburger menu, go down to Services. We have OBS Studio. If you have XSplit or Streamlabs OBS, you'll have to do it under their section. It's pretty easy to do. Let's see, all my stuff should be set to default. There we go, test my connection. And it was successful, there we go. So as long as that's connected, you shouldn't end up getting that red message anymore, and you should be good to go. And depending on what platform you're using, it should all be pretty similar. There we go, so now if I save this, open it back up, we should see no red message anymore. There we go, we're good to go. So now we do have our death counter command working. So it should now be able to work. Very simple, very easy. Let's test it out, shall we? Let's open our chat and let's do dead. There we go. Updated the death count by 1. Deaths 1, and we see a big old 1 popped up on the screen. Perfect. Perfect. I love it. All right. Now, we need to add the ability to change the number to whatever we want, because sometimes maybe you start a new game and you need to have a different count for it. You need to set it back to 0. You need to either reset it, or maybe too many people use the death command and there's been a mistake where it's now gone too, the number's gone too high. What we can do to do that is make a specific command that just is made just for setting it specifically. So we'll do that next. All right, let's go down to a new command. And then we'll call this one set death count. You can call it whatever you like. I just like to call it something clear. I recommend being very clear if you can. So then we have death counter command group. We'll keep that in there. Chat triggers, let's see. I like to keep it simple, so we'll say set death count. So it's very specific, so it's, it's pretty easy to remember that, I think, or we can maybe do it because maybe they'll accidentally put death count set. So let's do it with set at the beginning or the end. How's that? Death count set, just in case somebody gets it twisted around. It'll work either way. All right, so for this one, start with that counter command or action. Counter. There we go. We're saving it to the file. Always have that turned on to make sure that it actually gets saved. We're messing with the same counter, so now we can see it's in the drop down now. We can just click on it. We don't have to enter it this time. And what we want to do is actually set it to a specific amount. Now, that amount is going to be given as a parameter. When I say parameter, it's whatever comes after the command. So let's go back into our chat really quick. Let me give you an example. Let's say we wanted to do set death count, and we wanted to set it to 41 again with our earlier example. Then we do 41. That 41 after that is called an argument or a parameter, just depending on how you're looking at it. So we need to accept that argument as a parameter. And Mix It Up, it's there's a couple of different ways to look at it. You can look at the documentation for Mix It Up. I very much, if you're using Mix It Up, recommend that you look at the documentation because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I figured all this out just by looking at that. But what we want to do is use the first argument that they give us is going to be a single number, just in case they say the number and then have like an additional message if they want. In case they're being goofy, having a joke, we're just going to take the first argument. In order to do that, the variable, which you'd find in the documentation, is called arg1 text. So that's the first word or number or whatever that they entered, and we're looking at it as text. So we're going to set that. And one thing that I recommend doing anytime you use arguments in your commands is to come up here in the top right, and we're going to do arguments requirement. So we're saying that it requires an argument. So just in case somebody tries to use it, the command will come back with a response saying, you need to give me a number. So we're going to go add, we're going to name it, and the name is a description of what arg1 text should be. That's all that it is. So this is what will come up in the error message. So we'll say number of deaths. And the type is going to be, we want a number. So that's what we're trying to get from them. So that will let them know that we want, it needs to be a number, and that number needs to represent the number of deaths. So that's really just to help people who are trying to use the command get a little bit of feedback on what they may have done wrong. That's really all that's for. So if they were to type in like set death count DOM, then it would say like, we wanted the number of deaths and it needed to be a number instead of erroring in some other unknown way. All right, so now that we have the deaths being set to a specific number, that's all we needed for that. Now we just need to make sure that it's updated on the screen. So we're going to use our streaming software action. I'm going to go to OBS Studio because that's what I'm using. Text source. And mine was screen capture. Again, what I'm looking for in that scene name is what the scene that is located on, which we're on screen capture here. And the source name is going to be death counter, because that's what we're working with. We want it to be visible, so we're going to click that. We want to use deaths as what we're updating it to, which is what this will be now be updated to, deaths. And then we're going to point at that same text file from earlier, all at the same text file. There we go. There we go. Give it a second. Updated. Perfect. Now, if you want to give a little bit of feedback to whoever used the command, we can do a chat message, of course. And we could say username. Now, that's, speaking of variables earlier, this is a variable that also exists within the documentation. So whoever uses the command, you can use user in a lot of different things. Specifically, a lot of times we use username in order to get that back. So if I use it, it'll say Dom Dynamite. And then whatever else we type. So we'll say updated or should I say set? That would be more specific because it's set death count. Set the death counter to, and it'll be whatever the set deaths was. So we'll use the death count. There we go. So that should let us know what we got it set to. And if you want to make it so that only mods do it, make sure you look up in here. You can set the rules to just mods if you want. You can go to advanced and set up multiple people to be able to use it. If you want VIPs and subs and regulars, whatever you like, that can also, that's up to your discretion, however you want to do that. There we go. And then we'll save that. So we got a new command. So how about we test it out? So we got our count at 1 right now. Let's go ahead and do set death count, and we'll set it to 41 like we've been talking about. Now it says Dom Dynamite has set the counter to 41. Bing, bang, boom. And Bob's your uncle. We got 41. Beautiful. Now, let's see. Let me show you what happens when we don't give it an argument. We're just going to do set death count. And see, it says usage number of deaths. There we go. See? So it says that's what we needed. We needed the number of deaths. So now how about we say set death count to Dom. It's going to say, yeah, usage number of deaths. See, it's still, that wasn't correct. So it knows that even if you give it text, that's not correct. It needs to be a number. So there we go. So that's one reason why it's always good to include the type of data you're looking for in your descriptor. Like how I said, number of deaths rather than just deaths. So it lets them know like, oh, it needed to be a number. And preferably not written out. There we go. So at this point, you have a death counter that you can manually increment, and you can set back to 0 if you like, or to whatever arbitrary number you need to. So if you were to go into different games, you could set it back to 0 if you like. So it's not very automated. It's very basic. It does let you have a death counter on the screen and let your chat increment it using chat commands. So there is your basic death counter. That includes the first part of this video. So the next part of this video, we are going to go into a little bit more advanced stages where we are going to create a system where this death counter can actually be saved to the specific game that you're playing and be loaded using whatever game you're tagged in on Twitch as well. So this is adding a little bit of automation where you'll be able to say you're playing Cyberpunk one day and you're playing, I don't know, The Witcher 3 on another day, and you have death counters for both games. Well, this will look and see what is the player playing. They're playing The Witcher 3, then we need The Witcher 3 death counter, and it will load that death counter. So to start with that, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to save the death counter as a separate number. So what we're going to want to do is start with creating a new command. We'll call this one save death count. Put it under that death counter command group. And let's see, for some triggers, we'll say save death count. This seems obvious. And then how about death count save? And it will start with a file read write. So if we're going to have a death counter for this game, we need to save a file for it. And so this first step is just simply creating that file. So we're going to use the file rewrite command, and we're going to save to a file, and that's going to make our new file for us. But the file is not going to exist yet. So what we're going to have to do is use variables in our file path to make sure that it will exist. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to browse first, just so we can get most of it. I'm going to go ahead and click on death counter, but this is not the file we're going to be using. We just want to get that file location. So go ahead and hit yes. That just puts the file path in here. There we go. Now we have the file path in here, but instead of saving it to death counter, what we want to save it to is whatever game is currently tagged to your stream at the moment when this is ran. So what we're going to do is use a variable that exists within the documentation that makes it up, and it's called stream game. So now it's going to save a new file into that folder that's named after the game that's currently tagged on your profile. And we're going to save into that file the number of deaths that are currently on your counter right now. So we're going to go deaths. So since that's a counter that exists, that has now become like sort of like a global variable, as you might call it. So now we can use that counter as a variable, just like we use variables like username or stream game in this example. All right, so now we have our new file saved for us, and we have the death saved in it. Now let's go ahead and put a message out there to let the user know that it was successful. So we'll say the death count of, we'll go ahead and include how many deaths were saved, just for troubleshooting purposes so we know it works. Has been saved under, and we'll put the stream game by, and we'll put the user's name. There we go. So now that will tell us how many deaths were saved, what they were saved under, and who did it. There we go. And for now, this is all we need. In a further section later on in this video, we will be adding more commands here in order to make things a little bit more automated. But for the purposes of just being able to manually save and load deaths from a file, this is as far as we need to go at this point, but we will be revisiting this later. So we'll go ahead and save. You might want to change your user requirements if you want, to make sure that only mods can use it if you like. And we'll go ahead and save that. So now we can save death count. So let's see. I don't know if I have a game set on this as my testing account. So let's see. I'll do set game cyberpunk. I think they have it capitalized like that. 2077. There we go. We got the game updated now. So now we can do save death count. So that 41, death count of 41 has been saved under Cyberpunk 2077 by Dom Dynamite. There we go. Worked perfectly. Now if we go into our file here, under project files, tutorial, we can see that a new text file is here. That's called Cyberpunk 2077. You can click into that and you can see that it's got 41 saved in it. So there we go. We got it saved now. But now since we have the ability to save them, we need the ability to load them. So let's make a command for that. Okay, let's go into new command. I'm going to name this command load death count under that death counter command group, and we'll go ahead and stick with the same naming conventions. It's always good to stick with naming conventions so that everything is similar. Makes it easier for your mods and your viewers to remember how these commands work should they need to run them. Load death count and death count load. There we go. So just like the saving one, we're going to start with the file read write, but the difference is we're going to be reading from a file. And that file we're going to be reading from will be the current game. So we're going to click Cyberpunk as an example so that we can get our file path in there. But instead of letting it the title stay as Cyberpunk, we're going to set that back to stream game. So now what it's going to do is it's going to try, when you run load death count, it's going to try to find a file that's named after the game that's currently tagged on your stream and get the data from that. And so we need to give that data a name, and so we're going to call that death count because that's the death count for that game that we're trying to load. So now we're done with the file read write, and we have this new variable called death count. Next, we're going to want to go with a command. We're actually going to utilize something that we did earlier, and we're going to run that command that we have called set death count. And so set death count needs a number, and that number is going to be whatever number that we grabbed from that file. So we're going to use that death count variable. So we're going to do $death count. There we go. That will set the current death count that should be on the screen to whatever was in the file. And that's really all we need specifically. The only other thing I would think that we would want is our feedback message that helps us know that it was successful. So deaths for stream game have been loaded by username. Oh, hope if I spelled that right, wouldn't it? There we go. Now that's all we need here. There might be some things, some extra things that we got in here for further automation, but again, we'll cover that later in the video if you're interested in taking your automation that far. But for this is just for using the load death count and the save death count manually. So this is all we need for here. So be sure to change your user requirements if you wish, and save that. All right, now we can test out our load death count, but first we're going to have to use set death count to get a different number because we want to make sure we can see it change. So we're going to go set death count to 0. There we go. And now we want to load the death count for Cyberpunk, which is the current game that's still tagged from earlier in the tutorial. So we're going to do load death count. Boom. It's going to read that as Cyberpunk, say that it's loaded, and so it says Dom Dynamite set the death counter to 41. That was from our set death count command. Since we have a chat message in there, it set that. And then it also said deaths for Cyberpunk 27 has been loaded by Dom. So there we go. Now we see that we have what was loaded in that file brought up. So let's try having two separate games now, and let's do that as an example. So let me do set game. I'm going to set it to Lake. I don't know if you guys have ever played Lake. It's a fun little slice of life type of game. You would never die in it, so it's kind of funny that we're using it as a death counter example, but hey, why not? So then we're going to do set death count to, let's say, 64, like Nintendo 64. So we got 64 deaths in a game that you can't die in. There we go. And so we're going to go ahead and save death count for that. So we're going to save it under Lake, since that's our currently streaming game. So death count has been set to 64, of 64 has been saved under Lake by Dom Dynamite. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. We'll see that that file is now in there. We have lake.txt now. Easy peasy. Now we can do set game. And we're going to set it back to Cyberpunk. So now we're in Cyberpunk, and we want to load Cyberpunk's death count, right? So here we go. Load death count. Boom. There we go. And we're back to 41, just like from Cyberpunk. And we want to go back to Lake, say a week later, I'm playing Lake or whatever on a different day in my stream schedule. We go to set game that day. We're setting our game to Lake. Then we go load death count. Back to 64 because we're playing Lake again. There you go, guys. All right, guys. So at this point, we have the ability to have a death counter on screen. We can save multiple death counters for different individual games and load them simply by just saying load and saying save. So there you go. Next, the next part of this video is going to cover how to actually automate this even further and making it so that when you go live for that game, it will load that game's death counter. And when you end your stream for that game, it will save that death counter and not only save it, but also hide it off the screen in case the next game doesn't need it to be there. So there you go. If you're interested in that, continue on with the tutorial. If not, we'll see you next time. Okay, so this next part of automation is going to get, things are going to get a little bit hairy, but I promise you it's all worth it. It's going to work swimmingly and you're going to love it. So here we go. We're going to start by making a few commands to hide and show the death count on the screen. So come back and mix it up. And we're going to start with how to show the death count. So we're going to call this one show death count. It's going to be our death counter group. We'll do show death count, show. Keep those naming conventions up. And we're going to start with streaming software action. Inside here, we're going to go to OBS Studio. That's what we're using for the example. And it's going to be a source visibility that we're worried about because we're trying to make sure that we're showing the death counter. And our source name for this one is death counter. If you want to be extra careful, you can go ahead and put your scene name in here. Screen capture. And we want to make sure that we're making it visible. So there we go. That shows it. Let's go ahead and put our chat message in there so that we know that it worked. Death counter has been shown by username. And here's one thing I recommend doing just to help other people understand how to interact with the death command, because sometimes, you know, new users might not be comfortable because they don't know exactly how they can get involved, you know? So what I like to do is include in my message the actual commands they can use. Dead to add deaths. And then maybe if you're like have restrictions, you can put like mods or subs or followers, whatever you set yours to, however you'd like that. There we go. We got our message. Next, we can do something. This is something I like to do, and this is, you know, totally optional, obviously. You can do any of this however you like. I like to use the command action to actually enable the command. So whenever the death counter is on the screen and is visible after show death count has been used, then the actual command becomes available so that people can't use the death command or accidentally increment a death counter if the death counter isn't on screen. So this is just an extra precaution. Obviously, you don't have to do this, but we'll see here. So the death command, the actual incrementing command, will be enabled now that we can actually see it. So this is how I like to do it. There we go. That's all we need for this command here. Be sure to set your requirements however you want and save it. So now we already have it on screen. So in order to test it, what we'll do here is we'll hide our number. So keep attention this top left here. And we'll say show death count. Bam, there it is. Easy peasy. We get our message that says, a death counter has been shown by Dom Dynamite, exclamation point dead to add deaths, and then for followers. There we go. All the information exactly as we want it. Okay, next up, we're going to be able to hide them, obviously. So we're going to go with hide death count. Put that under death counter. Hide death count, or death count hide. Keep that convention going. We're going to start with our streaming software action. Get that guy in there. I'm going to go with OBS Studio. And what we're looking at again is source visibility. This time we want to leave this unchecked here. So we're saying that we're going to make it not visible. Visible false, if you will. So the source name, again, is death counter. And our scene name is screen. Oop, too many E's. Capture. There we go. So that's all we need for that part. We'll go ahead and get our chat message in there to let chat know what's up, right? Death counter has been hidden by username. There we go. And then just like how we enabled it when we showed it, how about we go ahead and disable it when it's not on the screen. So we're going to go the command action. The type is going to be disable a command. It's going to be a chat command. The command is called death. There we go. We're disabling the chat or the death command. There we go. And that's all we need for this guy. So we'll go ahead and save it. Now we should be able to come back into OBS in our chat. We'll see hide death count. And it's gone. Death counter has been hidden by Dom Dynamite. Perfect. Now we can go back to show death count. Boom. 64. And it's been shown. There we go. Easy peasy. Exactly as we wanted it. All right. So we're still not out of the woods yet. Now we want to actually connect this to all these actions to an event so that this will happen without our intervention. And that event can be found under the events section in Mix It Up. So you're going to go to your hamburger menu in the top left. And we're going to go to events right underneath commands. And at the very top, you'll see that we have Twitch channel stream start. We're going to go ahead and hit add command. And in here, we're going to want to start with a file read write. Where are we at? There it is. So we're going to be making a new file now. So since we're going to be able to have games that have multiple games that have death counts with them, but not every game will, we're going to actually now start to create a list of all the games that have death counters for them. And then we'll be able to access that list to see if we need to bother loading a death count or not. So the first step here is we're going to read from that list. We haven't created that yet, so we'll have to create that now. So we're going to read from file. We're going to browse to our path where we keep all of our text files. And we're going to create a new file. A new text document that's called, I'm calling it available death counters. So we have available death counters. We're going to click on that. We're going to open that. And this will be a list containing all the games that we've enabled death counters for. And our special identifier when we read that will be available counters. There we go. Now the next step is going to be adding a conditional. So a conditional action lets you check on a piece of data first before performing certain actions. So this is going to be really useful in a lot of different contexts. Here what we're going to use it for is we're going to take that available death counters list, so whatever we read from that list, and we're going to use it as our variable here, and we're going to say if whatever this comes back with, whatever the data is in that text file, if it contains the current game that we're streaming that's connected to the stream right now, then we're going to do some actions. So the actions that we're going to perform in that case, the first one is we're going to want to load the death count. So action, command, we're going to go command type chat. We're going to load the death count. And we can leave our arguments blank. We can just do load death count. So we're going to run that. So that's going to read what game that we have it's currently tagged to our stream. And then it's going to load that game's death count should it exist. And we know it exists because we already passed our conditional of looking at what games we've already counted in the past. So after that, we're going to want to run another command, and that's going to be to actually show it. So we're automating, actually making sure that it's showing up on the screen. So we're going to do another chat one, and we're going to do our show death count. There we go, and that doesn't need any arguments as well, so we are done. That's as simple as that one is. It gets more complicated later, but that one's pretty simple. There we go. Save that. So now we have it set up to actually load the death count at the start of your stream. But one thing we need to do is actually edit the save and load commands to include this available counts list so that we can start accumulating the game names that we're counting deaths for into this list that we're checking at the beginning of the stream. So let's do that by going back to commands. We're going to go to save death count. We're going to add a few things here. The first thing that we're going to add is a check for what games are currently in the list. So the first thing we need to do is check the list of available counts to see if this game has already been added to that list or not. So we're going to read from file. The file that we're going to read from is our available counters because we want to check out all of the games that we're currently tracking. And then I will call this variable list of games. Okay, after that, we got our list of games. We're going to want to put a conditional because depending on if the game is present or not, we want to do an action. So that's a condition, so we need a conditional. So the first thing we're checking is that list of games. And we want to see if does that list of games not already contained. So we want to have these lesser than, greater than symbols next to the word contains because that means like a negative. So if this does not contain the second value, which is going to be the stream game. So if the list of games we return from the available counters does not include the stream game that's currently tagged to our stream, we want to add it to that list because we're starting a new one, right? So the first thing we're going to want to do is add an action here. We're going to do file read write. Instead of reading this time, we're going to append to file. So what append means is we're going to add that text onto a new line in that text file. So we're just adding something to it. Instead of saving over it, we're just adding to wherever that last entry was, we're going to add one right below it. So what we want to do is our file path, we're going to do available death counters. Yes on that. And the text that we want to save is the name of the game, because that should match the name of the file that we're going to save, and when we want to load it, it'll match next time we play the game. So this is how the automation works. And there we go. Now when we save death count, what we're doing is we're creating a file with the current game name that contains the number of deaths, and we're communicating that to our chat. Then we're going to look in our available death counter list, check to see if we've already checked out this game before and added it to our list, and if we haven't, we're adding it to the list. So this should only happen on new ones. This will only occur if it's a new game. There we go. Now go ahead and save that. And now what we can do is come in here and do save death count, and then that will now save it again under the lake file, and then it will now put that name of the game, lake, into available death counter. So if we open this up, we should see lake is now available as one of the games that we're counting. So if we go back over to Cyberpunk to set this up, and then we load death count, we go back to 41 for Cyberpunk, and then we want to save death counts for Cyberpunk to put that on the list as well. So now we've saved it. It's now on the list. So we'll go to available death counts again, and we'll see Cyberpunk 2077 is also there. And now we are completed with our save death count changes. So that has now been made to automate. So now that we have our save death count set up, now we need to go back to our events, and we're going to go ahead and finish up the stream stop event. So at the end of the stream, we're then going to save our death count to a new file or a current file, and we're going to add it to the list or not in case it's already been tracked. So for this one, we're going to start with a file read write. First thing we want to do is check that list once again. So we're going to read from file, and that is going to be the list of available death counters that we have. Open that. And we're going to call that, this time we'll call it tracked games. Those are the games that we're currently tracking, so to give a little bit of context there. Next, we're going to want to add a conditional, because depending on whether or not the game is tracked or not, see, I put an S on there, tracked games. So we're going to want to check and see if in the tracked games list, if it contains the current stream game. And if it does, we're going to want to go ahead and save it to that file. So we're going to go with command, run command. We're going to run our save death count chat command. There we go. After that, what we want to do is hide the death counter, because perhaps in the next game we don't actually want to track our deaths. So we're going to go chat, hide death count. There we go. So at the end of the game, we'll be hiding it, so to keep it nice and clean. Perfect. So now when we end our stream, we're going to read from our list of games that we are tracking our deaths on. We're going to check and see if the game that we played today was one of those games that we're tracking. And if it was, we're going to save the current death count, and we are going to hide the death count from the screen. Perfect. There we go. So let's say we're set to our Cyberpunk. Let's go back to OBS. We're set to our Cyberpunk stream. So let's say we set the game to Lake. Oh, no, sorry. Set game Lake. There we go. Now we're playing Lake. So now if we started the stream, let's go ahead and just run this little test button right here. It lets you test the command without actually going live. So we're going to test our command as if the stream had started. And see, it's been set to 64. And it says here that it has been shown by me and that it's been set to Lake. And there we go. It lets people know how to interact with it. So that was the start of our stream. And so then if we actually add something to it, let's say we died in Lake somehow. Now it's 65. And now we're going to end our stream. There we go. It's hidden itself and it's saved at 65 under Lake. And so there we go. And now when we start Lake back up, if we start our stream, boom, we got 65. It's shown because we track Lake. Bing, bing, boom. So now let's say we end our stream while we're still playing Lake. So we'll go ahead and hit stop again and it'll hide it. Now we're going to switch to a completely different game. Let's see, what should I do? Let's do Elden Ring's big right now, so we'll do that. That one actually makes sense for deaths as well. So set game, Elden Ring. There we go. And we don't track Elden Ring, right? So let's see what happens when we start the stream. We're going to hit play. And we can see nothing happen. Why did nothing happen? Because we've never tracked deaths in Elden Ring before, right? So then it's not going to show up. So then when we end our stream, we go ahead and hit that. And you'll see nothing happens. Because, again, we have not tracked it before. So that prevents you from getting a death counter for every single game. Unless it makes sure that only games that you actually care about setting death counts for are tracked. But this actually brings up a really good question. How are we going to start death counts now? And there's an answer to that. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new command. And it's going to be called enable death count. And so this is going to be sort of like the main command other than dead or death that we're going to be using for using our death counters. So you or a mod, if you guys start playing a game that you want to track your deaths in, you can just use this enables death counter command, and then it will put the death counter on the screen. It will save a new file for that game. It'll put that game's name in the list, and then going forward, anytime you play that game again, it'll be on the screen. Anytime you stop playing it, it'll be saved and hidden from the screen. So this is going to be their final piece of our puzzle. So let's do it. That'll require us to go back to commands. We're going to want a new command. And we're going to call this one enable death count. Put that in our death counter group. We call it, let's see. The actual command can be, of course, enable death count or death count enable. I can see a lot of good ones here. You know, start death count start, new death count. You could do a lot of different aliases here, so feel free to do more. This is just for an example. I'll just stick to the two to keep with our naming conventions. Now, in order to start this off, we're going to do a file read write, because we're going to want to do another check to see if we have already tracked this game before. So read from file. We're going to go to available death counters as our text file. So look at our list. I'm going to call this, I'll go ahead and call it tracked games again. There we go. Then, of course, we're going to need a conditional, so whether or not that game has already been tracked or not. So this time we're going to want to say if tracked games doesn't already contain the stream game, because this time we know we want to track it. So if it's not already tracked, then we need to track that. So the first thing that we're going to do for our conditional, should those conditions be met, is we're going to want to start out with a command. That command that we're going to want to run is one that we wrote earlier. It's a chat command, and it's going to be set death count. So since this is a new game, presuming we don't have any deaths so far, we're just going to set it straight up to 0. So our argument that we're going to pass to it is 0. So setting death count to 0. That's step 1. Next thing we're going to want to do is show the death count. So we're going to use that command earlier that we wrote to show the death count. There we go. Now on the screen should be the 0 that we have set. And to top it all off, we're going to run our command earlier of save death count. That will create the file and add the name to the list of games that we are currently tracking. Oh, save death count. There we go. And that should do it for us. We can, if you want, you can add a chat message in there somewhere if you'd like. There are chat messages for most of the commands that we're running in here, so I'm going to go ahead and rely on those when we go ahead and do our test really quick. But yeah, feel free to add anything else you want in here. Obviously, guys, this is your playground. Do with it what you will. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save that, enable, and come back into our chat. And so now we're playing Elden Ring, and we want to have a death counter now because somebody, notices I'm dying a whole lot. So let's go ahead and ramp that up by getting that death counter enabled. So enable death count. Sets it on screen, sets it to 0, lets you know that it's been saved under Elden Ring 40. There we go. Now we have a death counter. So let's go DED dead. Oh, I died once. Oh, I died again. And maybe I died a third time. And many, many more times, I'm sure. So then we have it. We're in the middle of our stream. It's set. No, we're getting to the end of the stream now. It looks like I've got... Okay, let's just do it more than that. Let's do something more realistic. Like set death count 300. So, maybe I've been playing Elden Ring for a little bit. And, I got a little carried away. Maybe I couldn't get past one of those bosses. So now we're at 300. So now it's the end of our stream. Nobody's really thinking about saving the death count because, you're just trying to have a good time. But the magic thing about it is, let's go over to our events. And we'll say the stream is going to stop. End of the stream. Goodbye, everybody. Stop the stream. Then that death count of 300 has been saved under Elden Ring. And it has been hidden from the screen. So that when we go to play our Minecraft or whatever else we're playing, paparazzi, if you will, where we're not tracking deaths, no death counter on the screen on accident, no messy leftover UI or anything like that. Just beautiful, clean death counts. That's all I want, people. And that's all I want for you. If any of you want to keep it simple for yourself but would like to use the logic that I have posted here, I'm actually going to be sharing the actual files for you guys. And you can use those and mix it up. Let me show you that really quick. So if you download the files that I'm attaching to the bottom of this video, you'll be able to import these commands using this button right here. So when you go to add a new command, you can import actions from a file, and then you'll be able to load the files that you've downloaded from me, and that should give you the skeleton for your commands. Then you'll just have to go in there and edit each of the file paths to make sure that those file paths match your location for your text file. So you'll just have to click browse in all of the file read writes and select your file. But everything like that, other than that, should be set up exactly as I've done it in the video. So feel free to download those, guys. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. Those of you who've stayed all the way to the end, I really hope you guys have got a good idea about how you can use Mix It Up in some pretty advanced ways to do some pretty interesting things. So definitely, keep thinking about it, guys. You can do a lot of stuff with this. It does not need to be a death counter. It can be whatever you want, and you can automate it by game if you like. You can have it show certain parts of your overlay, hide certain parts of your overlay when you're playing specific games. Say if you have a Minecraft Monday thing going on and you want to have some Minecraft bit on your screen on your overlay when you're playing Minecraft, but you don't want to be bothered to have to remember to turn it on and off. Tie it to an event. Start the game or start the stream. Have the Mix It Up check whatever game you got going on and show and hide some stuff. You can do a lot of cool stuff with this, guys. And I really encourage you to take the techniques and the actions and events that we've utilized in this video and run with them. Do what you like, be creative, but most of all, you guys just keep having a good day. Thanks for coming by, and we'll see you guys next time.